Hello, my name is Ella Whelan. I work with the Academy of Ideas. I'm a journalist and I'm also the acting convener of the Battle of Ideas Festival, which is the Academy of Ideas annual political festival. And I'm really delighted today to be here zooming in with Jenny and Kate from Rights for Residents to talk about the ways in which the lockdown has affected, perhaps negatively, perhaps positively, perhaps a mix of the two, some of the work that they've been doing around care home residents and care for the elderly. So thank you very much, Kate and Jenny, for being with us today. Can I first just start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us about Rights for Residents and your work within it?
My name's Jenny Morrison. I'm the co-founder of Rights for Residents. And together with my partner, Diane, we set up Rights for Residents in September last year to fight the inhumane visiting restrictions that have been placed on care homes since the first lockdown.
Yeah, my name's Kate Meeko. So I have a mum in a care home and randomly came across Jenny and Diane's campaign in September last year and got in touch with them. So I run the Twitter feed, basically, set it up and run the Twitter feed side of it, which is interesting.
What happened sort of last year, the pandemic struck, and like many other care homes, Mum's Care Home locked down very early, before the actual lockdown, before the national lockdown. And to be honest, Ella, we were quite relieved about that because we didn't understand the virus. People were frightened and it seemed to be, affecting huge numbers of vulnerable elderly people in other countries. So we really initially welcomed that lockdown, and we were fully supportive of keeping care homes closed during the initial national lockdown. But then as the restrictions eased for all the other members of society, certainly in the summer of last year and into the autumn, we fully expected that some of the restrictions that were placed on care homes would be eased somewhat, so that at least maybe one or two members of a family could, still visit their loved one in a care home. So obviously we weren't calling for the doors of care homes to be thrown open and, huge numbers of traffic to be allowed into care homes. But what we were seeing is that people were literally deteriorating very, very quickly as a result of being separated from their families. I mean, you're talking about people like my mum and many others who've got dementia or other conditions. And we are, the eyes, the ears, the voice of our loved ones. Without that, they were suffering greatly. And then, of course, you've got young adults and children who were separated from their parents. And that saw a huge increase in things like behaviour problems, distress in them. So we decided, myself and Diane, after, experiencing or believing that nothing would change if we just waited for the government to act, we decided to set up a campaign and call for change and call for a change in the visiting guidance. And that was in September last year.
Tell me a bit about your mum, about Jean.
Yeah, well, my mum is just like, she's a real character, actually. She's a very feisty lady. She has a great sense of humour. We looked after her between us at home, her daughters, for quite a long time, as most families do. And we never thought we'd see the day, to be honest, when she would go into a care home. But she has dementia. She's in the late stages of Alzheimer's dementia. And on top of that, she had a massive fall, maybe 3.5 years ago now. And unfortunately, social services said to us that it would be dangerous, really, to keep mum at home. She broke her shoulder, her arm, her hip, believe it or not, and her knee in this one fall. So she was immobile then. So it was, as we all were, it was just too difficult for us to give her the round-the-clock care that she needed. And then it took about probably 12 months to settle mum into the care home because, people don't realise that these people who go into care homes, they literally have to give up everything they've ever known all the people that are surrounding them, all the possessions, everything, all the decisions that they make day to day has all been taken away. We couldn't avoid that, but we could ease that by being around for her quite a lot. So then once she got used to the care home, and the carers were brilliant, she became quite settled. And I would say that, you know, she had a really good quality of life in the care home. She really did. And myself and Diane set up a group that sort of arranged and fundraised for activities, entertainers, and to support the home. So I would say probably every single week, Mum would have one of her 4 daughters, would visit the care home for maybe 4 or 5 hours. So there was just 2 days maybe where she wouldn't have that family visit. So really, we were sort of, you know, giving her the support, as much support as we could possibly give. And then with the support from the care home, she was relatively happy and settled, yeah. In fact, they used to call Mum Smiler in the care home before the pandemic struck. And I can tell you about an incident, a direct incident that led to the setting up of our campaign, to be honest, Ella. In the summer, we were allowed to do window visits. So that was one of the few concessions that was made over the summer last year. And so basically we would go to the window, myself and Diane, my partner, and so we'd be outside in the garden, Mum would be inside in a lounge, and she'd be in a wheelchair, we'd be outside, the window would be closed. And like I said, she's got dementia, so she was just completely confused about what the heck was going on. She had no idea what a pandemic was or why we couldn't come in. So this was like really distressing for her. So we'd done a few of these visits, and then I think it was on the 3rd visit, we approached the window and Mum was on the other side. And she just literally broke down. I mean, uncontrollable tears, and she never cries. She's like, say, she's tough as old boots, to be honest with you. But she just cried and cried. And we were banging on the window trying to comfort her. We couldn't go in, and there were no carers around. So we were forced to call into the care home on a mobile phone and try to locate one of the carers for them to come and comfort Mum while we stood outside. And we said, Mum, you know, what's wrong? And she said, I'm just too sad. I'm just too sad. And we were distressed then by the visit. So we drove home that day, and I said to Diane, there must be something that we can do. We can't just accept this situation that people can be locked away and basically the government throws away the key. So that was a pivotal moment that we decided, because like I said, we'd never seen Mum down or, you know, sad or depressed. So that was the sort of the thing that, you know, that lit the touch paper really for us.
Thanks for sharing that. And Kate, let's tell us about your mum and how you got involved in the campaign.
Okay, so my mum was diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's, 11 years ago now. At the age of 64. So she has been in a care home for the last 5.5 years. She basically got delirium and became a danger to herself. And like Jenny said, it's the last decision you make to put someone into a care home. You want to keep them at home. You want to keep them with you. You want to be able to do it. You just, sometimes you can't, you know, she tried to, you try to jump out of your bedroom window because you think that's the front door and things. You realize at some stage you have to make a decision. And she's in a really lovely home. It's on her floor, is quite, the dementia floor is quite small, you know. And Mum was, when she first went in there, was very, very active. She literally ran up and down the corridor. She was someone who was very walking, very active, laughs a lot, talks a lot, loves to party. And enjoyed life. And once she got over the delirium and they managed to sort out whatever was causing that, she settled into the care home really, really well. And now, I mean, it's, as I said, she's been there 5.5 years. So now she is completely immobile, completely non-verbal. So she can't talk at all. She makes her own sort of noises. depending on how agitated she is, they'll be louder or whatever. But certainly, you know, I walk into the room and will say hello to her, and she bursts out laughing. Yeah, her eyes light up, and she just bursts out laughing. I go, "Mummy, mummy, mummy," which they feel, because that's what I call her, that she says, that's why she says it to me, because that's who she associates it with. And so March the 12th, I think it was last year, I know it was last year, obviously, you know, the pandemic was coming in, care home closed down, and you get it. You know, March to May, you sort of got it. It was horrific for everyone. The carers didn't know, you know, the homes didn't know what was happening, the carers didn't know what was happening, and all they wanted to do was close up, protect everyone. And you sort of understood that. And then come June, July, was it July, the first mention of care homes was put into guidance. You know, we'd all been waiting for this moment, and you're suddenly, yes, you might be allowed to look at someone. And I use look at someone intentionally, really. So I then first saw my mum. Before that, we'd been having Skype calls, and a Skype call lasts for 2 or 3 minutes because, to be brutally honest, I'm looking at her. She can't talk. She doesn't understand a screen. She can't focus beyond, you know, a hand away. She's lost most of her senses. The one sense she hasn't lost is touch. So I talk to the carer. It's an opportunity for me to catch up with the carer, make sure she's all right, she's eating properly, drinking properly, there aren't any issues or whatever. And, you know, you go from seeing someone four times a week down to a 2-minute phone call. It's not easy, and she doesn't understand why or what or where. And I can explain to her, I can talk to her all I want, but you don't know how much is computed. You don't know how much is taken in. But anyway, then, so forward to July, and you get that news. Yeah, you can go and see them. So I saw Mum for the first time, actually. She was then sick for a couple of days. The day I was meant to go and see her, so I then had to postpone it. So it was the beginning of August, and it was lovely to see her. She was asleep the entire time. She was sitting in her chair 4 meters away from me outside in the garden. And from August to December, I saw her 10 times. Once in December, it was through double glazed patio doors, and that's crackers. It's painful for everyone. It's like looking at a specimen in a zoo. But anyway, so come the end of August, I don't know how I came across Rights for Residents. I did. They have ways of getting hold of you, I tell you. It's dangerous. But I think I must have seen the petition or the Facebook page or something. But I mean, it literally was, I was looking back, I think that the end of August, I sent Jenny a message saying, I volunteer with various dementia charities as well. So I do quite a lot with them. So I said, yeah, I can do anything, happily do anything. What do you know, whatever.
You know, how did you feel the weighing up of, I mean, you've told an incredibly emotive story about how your mum has deteriorated because of the lack of touch.
Yeah.
Did you feel, obviously, you know, like you said, the sort of initial months of the lockdown, we didn't know what this was going to do. And so everyone thought, okay, a pause is probably sensible. But in those months rolling on into summer, did you feel that there was a lack of a sort of weighing up of the clear evidence that your mum and other people's, you know, family members who've had similar experiences, the quality of life was deteriorating, balancing that with the risk of the virus? You know, did you feel that there was that kind of balancing? I mean, in wider discussion, or did you think that was lacking?
At some stage, you have to take, you know, most people go into a care home and, okay, mum's an exception. She's been there a long time, but the average time is 2.5 years. So at this stage, you know, if we talk August, September, they've already lost 8-9 months of a year out of it. And by now they've all lost a year of family time. And yeah, I mean, mum has gone into her shell. And the Skype calls and things get more and more one way. And you can see that the focus is just going. And it's not because the carers don't care. The carers are incredible. And we all know the carers are incredible. it's not having that family touch, those family memories, there's the in jokes, the buzzwords, the whatever, and that's the bit that, I mean, so I have seen my mum last week, on day 365. I got to see her for half an hour, and I walked in, and after a couple of minutes, she just laughed, and she laughed for half an hour. She would not let go of my hand, and I talked rubbish to her, but I was saying, I can't repeat the family limerick, but I was saying various things to her, and she just burst out, roared with laughter. And the carers were just the carer who was sitting there with us, she said, gosh, she really knows what you're saying. I said, yeah, well, I am a daughter. I know which buttons to push. And it was obvious, the difference between the calls that I've been having. And it's very difficult to judge with someone like Mum because she's so much further advanced. So she already was immobile, she already was non-verbal. So you're judging a much smaller percentage of things that are missing, or not missing, but have deteriorated. And it's a much subtler change in a way, unlike Jenny's mum, who has probably the difference is more obvious. But with Mum, she's just gone into her. You could tell there was just something missing. She looked pale, she looked sad, she just wasn't laughing. And I suppose that's the difference.
Can you tell us what the main demands are from Right to Residence? What was the central kind of campaigning point? What policies did you want to change? What laws did you want to institute? What was the kind of detail of the campaign?
The things that underpin our campaign, to be honest, Ella, touch on what you've just said about the balancing of risks. We started our campaign really because we felt that the government were not balancing the risks to people in care homes. So on the one side, of course, you have the risks of vulnerable people catching COVID, and dying from hospitalisation that way. But we felt that there were huge risks to people's mental and physical health, and they were deteriorating in all sorts of ways as a result of the loneliness and isolation. And we felt that there was no balance at all. In fact, we felt that the catastrophic errors that were made at the start of the pandemic, where, quite huge numbers of COVID positive patients were discharged into care homes with, awful effects, thousands of deaths. We felt then that underpinned all the policies that followed. So the shutters came down directly as a result of that catastrophic error. And basically, they never really reopened until recently. So our campaign always focused on the need for government to produce new policies and guidelines that were more nuanced and balance the different risks, because there is a lot of evidence to show that people have died of loneliness and isolation. There is a lot of evidence to show that people have stopped eating and drinking. For example, in my own mum's case, she stopped speaking. She can't even move her hands, she can't feed herself, she can't do any of these things. And that happened pretty rapidly, probably within that first 3-month period, and it's just deteriorated since then. So basically, we started off calling for relatives to be tested once the testing capacity was there. And certainly by the end of last summer, there was a lot of surplus in the testing capacity daily. And we expected and were calling on the government to use those tests for relatives in the same way that they were testing care home staff, to ensure at least 1 or 2 members of a family could maintain that vital support to their loved one. It took a long time, and then by Christmas, the campaign had become huge, actually, and newspapers like the Daily Mail had backed the campaign, and lots of MPs and high-profile politicians. And then the government guidance was changed to allow indoor face-to-face visits, and care homes were given rapid tests for, to be used with relatives. But then what we saw in December was that it became a bit of a postcode lottery for relatives. So the guidance that came out was advisory only, wasn't mandatory. We had been calling for it to be mandated so that care homes couldn't pick and choose which parts of the guidance they wanted to use, and so that all relatives had the same access to their residents or their loved ones. So we had a situation where some people were getting visits and some people were still being denied visits. So the government changed the visiting guidance for care homes again on the 8th of March. And what they said was they would allow every resident could have a nominated visitor who could, visit regularly. And in addition to that, they would have an essential family caregiver, which is what we were calling for. So the government recognised that there was this need, and they, were encouraging, if you like, trying to persuade care homes to allow these essential caregivers to go in. But again, the guidance was made advisory and not mandatory. And we're now in the position just over 2 weeks after the guidance has been issued, whereby some care homes are allowing nominated visitors, some are allowing essential caregivers to go in and give the essential care that's needed to the loved one, and some care homes are even now still imposing visits at the other side of a screen or a window and not allowing any face-to-face visits at all. So in essence, the government guidance is actually quite good. It's certainly an improvement. It certainly recognises the need that, families are not just visitors. They provide essential care. But unfortunately, because we can't legislate it, many care homes just ignoring it. So families in many cases are either still locked out or they're forced to have like a 30-minute visit, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks,
It's perhaps not helpful to always play the blame game, but in terms of who is at fault for the kind of, I suppose, what you could characterize as the sort of the evils of red tape and bureaucracy around this, what Jenny's talked about the shutters coming down, but basically without any kind of nuance in terms of how to deal with this. Is this, do you think it's just down to the sort of panic about the pandemic, or is there a precedent that was set kind of beforehand in terms of the way in which, I know you've both beautifully described the positive experiences you have personally with the care homes that your mothers are in, but in general, in terms of the way in which the care system has often failed the elderly in particular, in terms of it being this kind of, this ugly characterization of care homes often as places where people just end up deteriorating because there isn't that kind of focus on the informality of how do you spark joy, how do you get people out and dancing, as you talked about your mum doing, all those kinds of things. Do you think that's been compounded? Is it just that previous trends have gotten worse, or is there something new happening? I suppose what I'm asking is, are these individual care homes in councils that are still now at this point resisting residents, is it actually really their fault rather than government lockdowns?
I think it's a combination of many things. I think there are Rights for Residents have weekly meetings with some care home managers, and these are managers that have been facilitating indoor full contact visits since last July, I think it is. So where there's a will, there's a way of doing things. There is a fear throughout the whole sector. Now, whether that's down to because of what happened so early on in March, the dramatic people being discharged back into care homes from hospitals without being tested, causing COVID to literally sweep through care homes. That it must have been incredibly distressing for the people working there. And so naturally the managers who ultimately have the legal responsibility for the care home the shutters are going to go down. They need to protect their staff. They need to protect their residents. Between the government, public health and local authorities, they act, in my mind, they act just under the written word. They don't necessarily have the emotion attached to it.
If you are lucky enough to be able to afford a high-end care home, you are going to receive a much better service from that care home. Because if you're paying very, very high fees, you as a relative and you as a resident are going to expect a lot for those fees, and you have a to, because you're paying perhaps an extortionate fee, you know, or maybe you're paying the fee that is, you know, you should be paying, because that's how much it costs really to provide a really good service. So I think in those care homes, communication is probably normally very good. And, you know, they provide a very good service, and they provide a lot of the extras that you don't get in care homes where people are not so affluent and perhaps can't afford the very high fees and this sort of thing. But what we found in the pandemic is across the board, even in care homes where the relationships between relatives, care managers and staff have been really good pre-pandemic, you know, always been very supportive. There has been, like almost across the board, a disconnect between relatives and residents. I mean, most people in our group, in Rights for Residents, and we have nearly 6,000 now, have said that before the pandemic, they had great relationship with their care home managers, and they had every faith in the fact that their loved ones were being looked after. But since the pandemic struck and people were not allowed to visit, it's really led to relationship breakdowns in care homes across the board, because managers have not really known what to do about the situation, because every day, every week, they're getting relatives ringing up saying, look, I want to come in. I want to see my mum, dad, husband, whoever, daughter, son. And the care home has had this constant issue where they can't let people in, or they've misinterpreted guidance and they feel they can't let people in, and they're actually not following government guidance. And there's been a real communication breakdown. And honestly, we have letters from people where we get sent emails from you know, relatives where they've had awful, and it's common, you know, emails from care home managers saying things like, you know, if you don't stop asking questions about visitors, I'm afraid you're going to have to find another home for your loved one, because we're finding it too stressful. And we've also talked about this with people like the NCF, and they are aware that there is now almost a complete distrust between care homes and relatives, and it's really serious, you know, and it does need addressing.
We've talked a lot about the effect on residents, but what from the 6,000 people who are involved in Rights for Residents, or anyone you've talked to, or even yourselves, what has been the effect of lockdown and this situation on the families of those residents? There's, you know, you often look at the effect on the person who is in the care home situation. But what about those who are visitors? What about the people at home? How has their mental health, physical health, whatever, been affected by this situation?
I think it's been largely ignored, and it's not been talked about at all. We've heard about the mental health effects on all sorts of groups in society, and it's just never been talked about. But, you know, Kate will reiterate this, I'm sure, in a minute, but, you know, it's really difficult to place a loved one into a care home, but then be told that you can't have any contact with them, and you can't support them, and you can't even explain it to them, because they have no concept of why their family has disappeared overnight, just literally gone. Can you imagine the guilt of that? Every single day for now a year, you know, every single night losing sleep, every single night worrying about their anxieties and their fears. And also the fact that largely they've spent a year in their room alone, because obviously carers can't be in the room with them all the time and replace all that attention they used to get from family. And people are having breakdowns. People are getting treatment, people are on sleeping pills, people are on antidepressants. And even worse than that are the people who've lost someone, Ella, during the last year. Some of them, believe it or not, have even been forced to say their goodbyes through a window, for example, at the end of life, or they've been denied a visit to the loved one unless it's been within the last few hours, or the, you know, and the trauma that people are actually being left with, the guilt of that, you know, if it happened to me, and it may do, you know, it could happen to any one of us, but if that happened to me, and I know that many of the relatives that we support, they just can't come to terms with it. They can't move on because they feel like they abandoned their loved one at the end. it's an indescribable feeling. I can't imagine any other situation where you would not be able to be with a loved one who was in distress. And we have got, Kate will qualify this, we have got lots of members who have lost people in that situation, and as well as ourselves are struggling, they are just absolutely bereft.
On the Twitter side of things, you only have to look at it, I can't go on, I don't know what else to do, why can't I see my loved one? My parents haven't been able to see each other for their 65th wedding anniversary. Why can't I see my son? It's his 35th birthday, probably his last. It's a continuous, and people just can't, it's not talked about. And I mean, I know care homes don't have a duty of care to families, and yet they say that they want, very much families are a part of the care home. When you go in, you become part of the big family. But you're not, I go and look at mum through a window for half an hour and then sit in the car park for 20 minutes crying because I've got an hour and a half journey home, and I have to calm down and bring myself away from that distress, because it's very difficult to describe just standing there looking at someone, not being able to communicate with them. She can't see me, but I can't not go and see her. She's my mum. And you times that by, well, as Jenny, however many thousands of members we've got, we're only touching the surface of people with loved ones in care homes. There are 300,000 people in care. Now, not everyone has the same opinion, and you have to respect that. But no one has addressed the mental health of families. It just doesn't seem to have. No one talks to the families. It's between the service provider and the authorities, and no one seems to actually talk to the service user. If we put it into a business speak, and it's very difficult. And everyone goes in sort of, well, it's like most people in the pandemic, but there are real lows, and I think we can all safely say that we've had some very, very low days, and who knows how long it's going to take. It's not a year I'm ever going to forget, not being able to see my mum properly.
I think as well as the actual grief of it, because you do feel like you're almost grieving for somebody that's still alive. But I think it's the actual frustration that you can see a loved one absolutely fading away. You can see a loved one being kept alive just simply to exist. People are deciding for your loved one that the quantity of life is more important than the quality when these people have only got a few months left. Well, they should be allowed to, and their families, decide on some element of risk. There is no risk-free solution in a pandemic. We have to take small, calculated risks. And as you said before, we have to balance risks. And I know that if my mum was coherent, if she was able to say and think and express what she really feels, I know that she would choose to live her last months with a small risk and see her family than spend these last months completely isolated and on her own. And let's not forget, since Christmas, we've had things like PCR tests, we've had rapid tests, we've had PPE, we can take temperature checks, we can do risk assessments, we've had vaccines. It seems absolutely ludicrous now that in some cases people still can't see their loved ones, and that it's not a law that you can, if taking all these procedures, can see a loved one that's in distress.
You've both mentioned the success of the campaign, and in particular the fact that I think you said around about Christmas that you got a lot of traction with MPs and big names getting the news out there. But if you were to characterize the way in which the discussion about the lockdown has happened over the last year, do you think there has been, have you felt stifled at any point? Have you felt able to talk about your experiences? I mean, what do you think has been the general picture for discussion about this? Like if you take, for example, there is this phenomenon of people sort of, particularly on Twitter, so you might be able to say something about this, Kate, people sort of either shouting, COVID idiot at each other if they criticize lockdown, or you're a kind of sheeple if you follow lockdown. There's a very coarse very blunt conversation going on, have you felt able to talk about the nuances of your experiences?
You can read the mood of things. It goes from joy to anger very quickly. And so when the last guidance came out, everyone went, yay, we can see everyone. And it, you know, we're all sitting there going, hang on a minute, this is guidance, not law. This is Christmas part 2. It's not going to happen again. And certainly within 48 hours, the mood had completely changed from one of, oh my gosh, I might see my loved one again, to it's not happening. And it's, so you could, people can express themselves there. And I'm seeing it in a very different way to Jenny and Diane, I suppose.
We've tried to keep it, the campaign as a sort of broad church, not political, not affiliated to any party. And certainly we got support from MPs across the board. We found that the print newspapers, in reality, the tabloids, if we're honest, have been more open to supporting our cause. We found the mainstream TV media has not really wanted to address the issue as much as newspapers, who seem to be more questioning in general, also including newspapers like The Guardian. So we've had right-wing tabloids that have openly championed our campaign and discussed the human rights angle of our campaign. And we've also, on the other side, we have had papers like The Guardian, for example, also supporting it. So it has resonated, to be perfectly honest, across a spectrum. But we have found that there is almost a bit of a blockage with the TV media. We feel that sometimes it's quite difficult, because this thing that's happening, this human rights abuse, because that's what it is. You've seen this happening to, actually there are 400,000 people living in care, and all of them have had the human rights to see even one member of family severely curtailed for almost a year now. And yet, you know, people like the BBC, they have covered it occasionally, but not as much as we feel it should have done, because we see all sorts of human rights abuses being reported on the BBC that are happening in other countries, for example, and rightly so. You know, absolutely 100% all of these things should be reported just because they're not in our country. But then when there's something that's happening on our own doorstep where we feel the government needs to be called out, that hasn't really happened. And I know the BBC can't be partisan, and neither can any TV media, but they can ask questions, and we would have expected more questions to be asked. You very rarely have seen a minister being put on the spot on a mainstream national news programme, being asked about this issue. And we found that quite shocking, because I've seen pieces on the main news programmes, trivial pieces about celebrities, about all sorts of, you know, ridiculous things. And I feel like there's something wrong in the media when they can focus on issues like that, about a celebrity breaking a COVID rule, for example, rather than 400,000 people who are being kept away from their families every single day for over a year. And so there's definitely something wrong there, I feel, anyway.
Talked about the fact that you want this particular, that you want the guidance to be made mandatory, and also that you basically, so that councils and care homes who might want to take the easy route and not deal with working out, you know, workable solutions for families to be able to overcome and make those balanced risk judgments that you're talking about. But what other lessons do you think we can learn from? I'm not asking you to artificially put a silver lining on this, because actually I think there isn't, you know, there isn't a silver lining. It's just very grim a lot of the time, and then that kind of reality should be said. But, you know, is it possible that we rectify some wrongs that previous to the pandemic? Like, is there going to be more attention paid to, for example, you know, dementia, which is, you know, I've written articles about this. It's something that actually is a really hidden condition, which you know, lots of people don't really know much about, don't know the prevalence of it, don't know how to deal with it. And like I said, kind of see care homes as sort of very instrumental, functional places, rather than homes, which are, you know, living, breathing places for families Is there a kind of moving forward some lessons that we can learn from this last year to not make mistakes again if another, I'm slapping wood here to hope it doesn't happen, pandemic rolls around, but also just the way in which we engage with people who need to access the services of care homes, from the young to the elderly and all in between.
You know, we're all from entirely different backgrounds. We've all got, there is just such a range of political perspectives in our campaign. And I'm sure Kate will agree, myself and Diane work really hard to keep it non-political, and to work with people who we wouldn't necessarily normally align ourselves with. Journalists, for example, who we perhaps wouldn't have aligned ourselves with at the beginning. And we realised that, you know, politics is the art of the possible. And to just feel that unless the parties can see beyond this, keeping this party political, unless parties come together on this issue, I don't think you'll see any change. Because if we look back, as you say, on any work that's been done around social care or on dementia or on research, no government of any political party has managed to even make hardly any inroads into the problem. And we've become very polarised now, I think, the parties. And I think there's too much point scoring in debates. And, you know, I certainly remember years ago that occasionally people would come together to back bills and private members' bills, and people would put their head above the parapet and they would gain cross-party support for an issue. And this is possibly, other than climate change, the most important challenge of our generation, is to get this right. And they use it as political football, and it's just so, and people are so annoyed about that with politicians. But we certainly feel that unless the government or we get cross-party support, we're working on that, and Liz Kendall and Harriet Harman are working on that at the moment to get cross-party support to ensure that every care home resident has the right to, you know, a family carer basically who can visit at all times, regardless, as you said. We could have other variants that appear in the next few months. We could have other lockdowns as a result of that. And certainly the people in care homes could be right back at square one, and the shutters will come down again. And we must protect people's rights in care homes. And I feel like unless we pass a law to ensure that people have the right to visit, then I think a repeat will occur.
There's a sad reflection on the state of the care system at the moment. It's and this pandemic has opened up some really big holes, which people probably knew were there, but it's blown it wide open. There's a huge difference between the small non-profit care homes, the big, huge care groups who just have a monopoly on a lot, you know. And within business, you look after the shareholder first, and then the and then anyone else, and that I think is very much reflected. I think there's a huge amount that needs to be done to rebuild trust in the care home system, because certainly, you know, we're asked every day, oh, I've got, you know, if I need to put my loved one in a care home, where would you go? Who would I go to? Whatever. I also think, without getting into a completely different subject, we have no comeback. There is, you know, if something's not going right, there is not an effective way of reporting it and seeing immediate action. You get words, you get platitudes, you get whatever, but you don't get immediate action. You don't get that immediate resolve to a problem, or that the guidance isn't being followed, or that this isn't being done. And so you're just left feeling as if, yeah, you don't exist and your loved one's life is not important. And so by pushing for this law, we've just got to make sure it never happens again. We've got to make sure that for the future, you know, there will be pandemics in the future. There will be lockdowns, hopefully not ever in our lifetimes, but they will. But this has to change. You just cannot let this happen again. And it's going to take a huge amount of rebuilding between families and the care system over the next few years to gain any sort of happiness back. You know, I know the care homes want to all welcome us back, but those big boards have got to work really hard to welcome back new clients, for want of a better word, because it's I think at quite a low ebb at the moment, their reputation. and that's as an ex-estate agent.
Thank you so much to both of you. That was really moving and really amazing. So thank you, and really informative. So thanks very much for that. And just